I'm Tommy Moore from the Bartitsu Lab, and today I'll be interviewing Lauren Ireland. Hello, Lauren.
Hi, Tommy.
Hello. So I know Lauren from quite some time back from various unarmed HEMA events or armed HEMA events that have been shanghaied into becoming subsequently unarmed. And Lauren teaches a Bartitsu club, and I would love to interview her for this particular segment. So to begin with, could you give me your view on Bartitsu? What do you think it's all about, and what do you think makes it special?
There's sort of the social context behind it all, and just like the scarce amount of actual source material we have specifically for Bartitsu just makes it so much more fascinating. Because obviously with Barton Wright and what he himself actually published, it was all essentially just glorified adverts, and there's not a whole lot of it. There's only 4 articles with some of the most ludicrous and fun techniques in there, but there's no real system behind it. For that, you've got to go digging, and in going digging, you find just an abundance of all these other brilliant source materials from the time, and it just makes it so fascinating. And you come across some really weird stuff, which just makes it extra fun.
So can you talk us through a little bit about how your Bartitsu / antagonistic class works? How do you kind of structure it? What's the kind of vibe?
It depends. We tend to run, initially when we started it, we're like, yes, every week we're going to do like the first half an hour will be kicking, the second half an hour will be punching, the third will be jiu-jitsu, and then for the final half an hour we're going to play with sticks. And then that instantly went out the window because there is no time to structure it like that. It just doesn't work. So now we tend to do a warm-up, usually based on some form of sort of Victorian or Edwardian exercises that we know were around at the time. So military drill comes in very helpful there, or the wonderful ladies exercises where you just stand and do sort of things like this. So yeah, do a warm-up like that. Then if we know there's going to be throws or anything in the class, we tend to do a bit of break falling as well, just to make sure we're up on that. And then we just tend to do that if we're doing some stick stuff particularly, we'll work on the stick stuff, work our way through that. And then if I'm planning it for one session, I usually end up running over. So we will then carry on doing that particular thing we're looking at for about 3 or 4 weeks. Then we'll move on to something different and like start focusing on the sort of boxing element or one of the jiu-jitsu elements. And then sort of every so often, it will all come very nicely together in a class, so we can smoosh it all together to actually create Bartitsu rather than just play with the individual components. So yeah, it pretty much depends on a week-by-week basis. But we do, throughout the seasons, we do try and get through absolutely everything to do a nice, well-rounded look and training of everything.
Okay, and what made you decide to pick up a Bartitsu class, an antagonistics class? Obviously, for people that don't know, you run a successful HEMA club, wrestling, pugilism. You know, what made you decide to go into that area too?
To be honest, the first thing I came across, it was close to a decade ago now, I think. I went to my first HEMA event, not even realizing it was HEMA, because like I just had some friends and they were like, oh, we rent this castle and we have swords and come and play. I'm like, okay. And I was so excited because I was going to get to play with swords. And then I went, and my favorite, most awesome class of the weekend was a Barton Wright one. It was like the dude who came to teach it. He just had the little Sherlock Holmes book of self-defense. He taught that class, and I threw somebody over my shoulder who was twice as big as me. And I'm like, holy cow, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. So I really got into it that way, and then couldn't find any classes or anything, so tried studying by myself for a while. That didn't work. Then luckily I found the YSD, so the York School of Defence, which I train with now, run by Chris. And so yeah, that got me into sort of all the medieval swords and everything. And then like gradually the club just got bigger and bigger, and we could sort of take over the hall for more evenings of the week. And I was like, well, Chris, I really like doing this particular thing. Do you mind if we branch out from just the sort of medieval stuff, and can we have a play with this as well? And he was like, yeah, sure, give it a go. So I got my own night of the week, and I get to now teach people Bartitsu, which is just awesomely fun.
And in terms of the kind of the Bartitsu you teach, do you have like a particular self-defense focus, or do you like to stick to source material, or how do you like to kind of what direction do you like to take it to?
I tend to like sticking to source material just because there's so much fun source material out there. And I mean, Chris, the Chris Halpin, who runs my club, he runs a modern self-defense class anyway. So anyone who wants modern self-defense, they go to his class. And so the Bartitsu class, we run more from like the historical side of things. So I get to look through all the source material. But as you know, like Bart and Wright, it's there's such a small amount, so it just means we get to like just branch over everything that we could find from France, from America, even some of the weird little bits from sort of Spain and Italy. Because let's face it, after Bart and Wright introduced jiu-jitsu, it just the whole world sort of was like, oh, this is fun. We're gonna take this, and then everybody and their mums was writing books about jiu-jitsu, and luckily there's a few sources on cane material as well. So I just love sticking to the original sources. Because that's how you come across all the crazy stuff and the extra weird advice from people like Dubois that tell you how to deal with like what to do if your house is burning down and how to not step over banana peels you see on the street because somebody might end up slipping and breaking a hip on them instead. I'm like, self-defense manuals that start with being nice to your fellow man. I can get on board with this.
And in terms of kind of those kind of arts, Bartitsu, you know, it's fair to say it's bloody niche. So how do you think it could grow? What do you think is necessary to kind of make more people enjoy it or engage with it? What could happen to make that work?
I don't know. To be honest, stuff you're doing is really helping, just like getting stuff out there on the internet for people to find. Because I think this is one of the reasons why it's so niche. Nobody really knows about it. I know, like, when the Sherlock Holmes movies come out, everyone's like, oh, and then a couple more people end up finding Bartitsu. But it's so hard to get into if there isn't a club near you that's doing any of those things that a lot of people just, they discover the thing and then they just give up. But yeah, just advertising, going to events and talking to people, because I know going to HEMA events, they're filled with Saudi people, but then they come and do the jiu-jitsu or the Bartitsu classes there and they're like, that is so much fun. I absolutely love that. I'm going to start doing this myself. And then they just message you and you send them all the links for all the source material. And then 6 months later, you hear that, yep, they're trying to start their own club or like they're at university and they've got like all these friends to come play with them. And just it spreads like that. It tends to be a word of mouth kind of thing. But yeah, it's the getting the word out there in the first place, which is the hard thing.
I mean, one of the things I noticed about your club, which I think is really fantastic, is you tend to get lots of women really enjoying the classes, which is sometimes harder in other bits of unarmed arts. There's lots of women in HEMA, Saudi HEMA, but unarmed HEMA, that number seems to dramatically drop off. Have you got any hints for, say, any other Bartitsu instructors that want to get more women into their classes or want to get kind of a better split of people?
I don't know, because see, with our club, we sort of don't see that we're doing anything particular. We just be ourselves, and then magically these people appear. But I think we don't put an overly competitive attitude on things. It's like if people want to spar, they can spar, they can happily play, but we like letting people work to their own levels. So we will encourage them. If we can see that they've been training hard and we think they're good at something, we will then encourage them to go and spar and to maybe try and take it a bit harder, but we never force them to. And there is absolutely no macho attitudes in our club at all. And I know certain places you go to, you just, as soon as they find out wrestling, they're just like, what's that? But and they assume right from the off that it's going to be all macho. But I think it kind of helps when there's sort of like me there being one of the instructors, obviously a girl, so that makes it more welcoming. And then, well, with Chris being the other instructor with the bright pink hair, it's slightly less intimidating. So if that helps, I mean, you can always dye your beard. You never know.
My only criteria for students is that they're evil. That's all I need. You've got tentacles for arms, if you've got a banana for a head, as long as you're evil, you're allowed in the lab. That's the only qualifying criteria. Qualifying criteria: can you do an evil laugh? And are you willing to shave your head and grow a beard? These are the only two criteria by which I set the club.
Okay. If they need the ability to grow a beard, you might be limiting yourself on the women on that front. Because sadly,
but it must be a good quality adhesive and a human hair beard. These are the things. In terms of things that you're working on yourself, in terms of martial arts at the moment, is there anything you're kind of studying, any text you're studying, any types of weapon or any of the arts, or anything you're really focusing on right now?
To be honest, I'm always off the Bartitsu front. I'm always looking at Mesa because I absolutely love Mesa, and I feel it ties in really perfectly with so much of like Vinny's cane system. It just like the way he insists that you hold the cane with like the extra little bit down the bottom, and even the length of it and everything, it all ties in quite nicely to a Mesa. And how Vinny points out that you don't just use the longer end of the stick, there are lots of things that you can do with the short flat end. And I'm like, well, that's like Mesa because you've got like all these arm wraps, and it's like all of the Mesa texts. Half of the stuff you see, like the grapples and the arm locks, you then see in Jiu-Jitsu and in Bartitsu. And I'm like, this is just amazing. When I first discovered all of this, it's like my mind was blown. I was like, this like 15th century text from Germany totally matches this Japanese martial art that Barton Wright then brought over in the Victorian age. And it's like, it's all the same. There is but one art. So yeah, Mesa is my main thing when I'm not doing all the Bartitsu. But when it comes to the Bartitsu stuff, I like looking at especially a lot of the French sources, just because there's so much more variety on like the cane type of work you can do. The Jiu-Jitsu sources, they tend to be about the same no matter where you're getting them from. But the cane stuff definitely tends to vary between the French and the English and the Americans. I also really like looking at old newspaper articles and things and just trawling through them to see whether I can find any evidence of them being used on the streets or any other random little articles that we haven't come across yet. About a month ago, I came across a brilliant one in this tiny little American newspaper, and it was like an umbrella self-defense. And I was like, I've seen plenty of umbrella self-defense articles. But this one was extra brilliant because it actually had you opening out the umbrella as part of the defense. And I'm like, you never see that. You see them using it like a small sword. You don't see them opening it out into the person's face. I'm like, this is a fun one. But of course, I found that once lockdown had started. So I've been desperate to teach it to my guys, but I can't because obviously we can't go and train with them. I'm like, darn it. So,
you and Chris and the club in general have like a really good heritage and background in wrestling and grappling. How important do you think it is for people when learning unarmed martial arts to learn a wrestling or a grappling system?
I think it's actually a really, really important skill to have. Even just from the basics of knowing where your own body is and what it's doing and how to hold your own, like your center of gravity, and how to take a hit and stay on your feet if you need to, or when to actually go down to the floor. Because you know what it's like. If somebody comes in at you, if you get hit, yes, you can stumble and stay on your feet. But if you're staying on your feet in that unadvantageous position, sometimes it's easier to go down and then get back up again than it is to just try and stay up and then end up falling over in a bad way. So the wrestling helps teach you when to sort of sacrifice yourself for like to win in the long run, or when to stay up and fight. And it means if you can practice break falling by yourself as much as you like, but until somebody is actually throwing their weight on you or throwing you physically to the floor, you will not know what it feels like to properly land. And I have to say, it's a lot easier landing on the floor when somebody's throwing you there than throwing yourself on the floor on a break floor. So yeah, wrestling is amazingly useful for that. Also, when you're training techniques with a compliant partner, it's amazing how easily you can get them to work. But the second that partner starts resisting in any way, it makes it so much more difficult, and it really helps you work on that millimeter perfect timing that you need in order to execute the throw properly. And if you're wrestling and sparring with people in an alarm context, then it teaches you that despite what the articles say, that yes, if you do these things, you will instantly throw them over your shoulder, you'll find out that no, that is not the case. You can do everything perfectly and you can try that throw, but if they just reposition their feet or lower their center of gravity, it's not going to work the first time. So you need to then have a plan B, C, D all the way through, just because chances are that first strike is not going to work. And so often the manuals and the source material don't tell you that. It's one of those things you only learn by actually getting in and playing with other people.
And in terms of not many Bartitsu clubs at all focus on or have any catch wrestling? Obviously, we know in the original Bartitsu club there was wrestling of many types. Most people typically stick to just the jiu-jitsu side. What if audiences don't know, what would you say are the kind of grappling differences between a jiu-jitsu and a catch wrestling style approach?
Jiu-jitsu, I always consider jiu-jitsu more like gentlemanly or ladylike. You get to keep your distance a bit more, so you get to be more upright. And basically, the reason jiu-jitsu is so good for the Bartitsu side of things and the upper class elements, you get to keep your clothes nice and clean. You don't have to go down to the floor with your opponent. Whereas with catch wrestling, you tend to go down with your opponent because then you can control them fully when you're down on the floor with them. And you don't just be nice and gentlemanly and ladylike and just throw them to the floor. You tend to throw them to the floor and land all of your body weight on top of them to make sure they stay on the floor. And then once all your body weight is driving into them, then you can play with all like the fun arm locks and face locks and chokes and whatever else you fancy while you're down there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun. I do like catch wrestling. It's amazingly fun. I also find with catch that because it's, again, like with jiu-jitsu, it's very, very scientific and you have to get your angles right. And the smaller person can defeat a bigger person if they need to, if they've got perfect technique. But I find because you're throwing yourself into it a lot more than you are with jiu-jitsu, you tend to be able to get a lot more things to work. If you're doing from a catch wrestling point of view, if your timing isn't quite right, because I know I study judo, like I go to judo classes to try and help with my Bartitsu side of things, because I do catch all the time, but I'm like, no, I need to properly focus on the jiu-jitsu side. So I started doing judo classes, and the timing to actually get any of the moves to work how they say they should work, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is impossible. It's just like, you've got to do these exact precise 3 steps and then be at exactly this angle and then do this thing in half a second. I'm like, it doesn't work. Whereas catch wrestling, it's, you're there and you're in contact the whole time. And it means you can feel what your opponent's doing more before you then decide what to go in and try and do. So certainly I'd say from a beginner standpoint, I prefer catch wrestling because I can kind of try and muscle my way through and feel my way through. Whereas from the jiu-jitsu side of things, in order to get stuff to work properly how you see in the manuals, you really have to train it to a really awesome level. Like, you have to repeat it time and time again, hundreds of times, in order to get that timing perfect. And even then, if you don't pull their arm in just the right direction, something's going to go horribly wrong. But because you're keeping that distance, it means you can't necessarily transfer into a different technique to counter what they've done. Whereas in catch, because you're always so in and so close, you tend to be able to feel when something's going to go wrong, so you know to pick the next technique a bit sooner.
Cool. And one just last question. What piece of advice would you give for listeners that want to start out in something like Bartitsu? What advice would you give them?
If you can, try and find another martial arts club near you that does anything. Honestly, it really is any martial art. Actually, as long as it's a martial art that actually the stuff they do looks similar to other stuff you've seen, chances are, if they're a martial art that just does something and it's like you've never seen that particular kind of throw or that particular kind of lock before, chances are they might be lying about how effective it is. But like I was saying earlier, there is but one art. So even if you can only get to like a sword club and do medieval fencing, half the moves you see in that you will see coming out in Bartitsu and jiu-jitsu and things. And how you use a stick is very similar to how you use a sword. It's all about the timing, the measure. You get that from any decent martial art. Will teach you about timing and measure and how to counter and how to focus and where you should be looking at your opponent rather than following the weapon, how you should be like sort of focusing your eyes more central so you can use your peripheral vision and things. And so yeah, any martial art will help you with that. I would say definitely try getting to a grappling one, because that then helps you so much, because it's the grappling element that people find so hard to transition to if they've constantly been working with weapons and with distance. Whereas if you find a grappling art, so judo is always a good one. It's filled with really nice big throws, and depending on the type of judo you do, it also then has some of the jiu-jitsu locks and elements and the ground control and everything that's necessary. But it teaches you how to land, it teaches you how to take a fall, it teaches you how to get back up again and to keep on fighting. And that's one of the most important things for any martial art.
Awesome. And finally, just a bit of a club plug. If people are up in your neck of the woods in York, how can they find you and find out more about what you do and potentially join?
We have a website, the York School of Defence. We are on Facebook, and well, yeah, basically all the links are there to just get in touch with us. So feel free to do so. We're always happy to meet new people, even if you're just like here on holiday in York, because let's face it, it's York. It's a lovely city. Everyone should come here to see the pretty medieval historicalness. Oh, and we've also got a brilliant museum with an entire Victorian street, which ties in perfectly to all of your Bartitsu loving needs. So yeah, come to York, look us up, York School of Defence on Facebook and the internet in general, and we will happily meet you and take you through some stuff.
Awesome. Cheers. So that was Lauren Ireland talking us through Bartitsu and antagonistics from the York School of Defence. Cheers. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Bye. Bye.